Alrighty guys, it is Qaaman here today and I'm bringing you another Dragon Ball GT segment on my Dragon Ball GT review part 3. Now, I will admit that it's been about a year since I uploaded part 2, and the reason is because I made part 2 when I had my old laptop, and when I got my new laptop I had other videos that I wanted to do first. However, in today's video I will be concluding my GT segment sharing my overall thoughts on the series. So without wasting any more time, let's get straight into this video. When it comes to Dragon Ball GT, my main opinion is this. The series is primarily hated by others because GT never lived up to its predecessors in Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. Now, GT could have easily have been a well-accepted continuation of the series if it managed to change several aspects of the show. For instance, turning Goku back into a little kid again was a major blow to the series in the Black Star Dragon Ball saga. The reason I say this is because it diminished the level of maturity that the Dragon Ball Z series had over the years. Even though Dragon Ball Z always had immature moments, the Namek saga and the Android sagas were much more serious, and the childish Goku in the GT saga, especially the Black Star Dragon Ball saga, made the show even more childish than the Buu saga, which was the most immature saga in Dragon Ball Z. Even several arcs in Dragon Ball, such as the King Piccolo arc or the Piccolo Jr. arc, were more serious than the Black Star Dragon Ball arc, as there were villains that were just way too weak and somehow posed a threat to Goku, Pan, and Trunks. However, I will admit that the show got a lot more serious in the Baby Super 17 and the Shadow Dragon arcs. When it pertains to other characters and their usage in the series, GT made characters even more useless. I will admit that in Dragon Ball Z, after a certain point, if you weren't a Saiyan, you were completely useless with the exception of Piccolo at certain points of the show. In Dragon Ball GT, if you weren't Goku, you were completely useless, which is why Thundershot and I call it Dragon Ball Goku's time, since the entire show was simply waiting on Goku to beat the main villains. A great example of this was shown in the Shadow Dragon arc. I have a question for all of you. Before Sin Shenron arrived, what were the Z Fighters doing to stop the Shadow Dragon threat? They were at their homes waiting for Goku and Pan to stop the Shadow Dragons. Wouldn't it have been much better if the Z Fighters made groups to stop the Shadow Dragons? For instance, Goten and Trunks could go after 2 of the dragons, Gohan and Oob could go after 2 other dragons, and Vegeta and Goku could go after 2 more dragons, and then all of the Z Fighters, including Pan or maybe even Android 18, could come at the end to fight against Sin Shenron and eventually a Mega Shenron in the end. I think that would have made the saga much more interesting. Now, moving on to the biggest problem I had with Dragon Ball GT, even though it may sound kind of personal, was the death of my favorite character, Piccolo. Piccolo wanted himself to die in Earth's explosion so that the Black Star Dragon Balls would go away and peace would return to the Earth. Well, his death did absolutely nothing since the Orange Star Dragon Balls had negative energy which built up over time, which led to the Shadow Dragons. In addition to his death, Piccolo did absolutely nothing for the series except for saving a little boy when Earth was about to explode. Now, he did come to save Goten in the Baby Saga, but he was quickly knocked out by Gohan and rendered completely useless. Not only that, even though he survived Gohan's blast, he did absolutely nothing when he was alive to potentially try and stop baby Vegeta on the Tuffle planet, even though he should have been there. He was also involved in one of the most illogical moments in Dragon Ball GT, which I'll explain later on. But GT made my favorite character useless. Tien and Yamcha were seen briefly and had no speaking scenes, which shows how much the show cared about them. Besides Vegeta, I think we can honestly say that none of the main characters had serious roles except for Goku and Vegeta. Oob was supposed to have a big role, but he ended up being a joke. As far as some of the illogical moments and inconsistencies go, I have a few throughout the series. When Earth was about to explode due to the Black Star Dragon Balls, Goku claims that he can't use the instant transmission while he's a kid, but there's a contradiction to that. He used it early in the series on Planet Namek alongside Pan and Trunks. He also used it right before Piccolo died in his child form, which completely denies that statement. Also, I believe the writers and the editors of the series were completely unaware of how impossible it was for Pan to be Goku Jr.'s grandmother at 114 years old for the Funimation dub, or even 109 in the Japanese dub. Regardless of which dub you take, it makes no sense, and here is why. If Pan had her first child at 44, which is very old to have a child but still possible, using the Funimation dub age at 114, that would mean Goku Jr.'s parent with the Saiyan gene has to at least be 70 years old. Now we don't know how old Goku Jr. is, but assuming he is at least 10 years old, which I think is a pretty good guess, that would mean Goku Jr.'s parent with the Saiyan gene was 60 when they gave birth or conceived him, which is practically impossible if Pan's child was a female, and very, very, very unlikely if Pan's child was a male. It would have made a lot more sense if the writers and the editors made Pan his great-grandmother or his great-great-grandmother due to the huge difference in age. My final illogical moment of Dragon Ball GT for today's video comes in the Super 17 arc. While Super 17 was dominating the other Z fighters in the fight, Goku was trapped in hell with Piccolo. Now, can anyone think of a simple and easy way for Goku to get out that the writers completely overlooked? Anything at all? Come on guys, I know you can think of this. Because Goku could have simply used his instant transmission to get out of hell and go to Earth. You want proof of how that's possible? At the end of Dragon Ball GT, where Goku was saying goodbye to all of his friends, he used his instant transmission to get into hell and to talk to Piccolo. This shows one of the biggest flaws of the series. Now some of you were probably thinking that Piccolo opening up hell for Goku to escape was useful, and you probably wondered why I didn't mention it before, but now that I have explained how illogical that situation was, I hope you guys can now realize that Piccolo's biggest contribution to the series was completely unnecessary. On the bright side of things, Super Saiyan 4 was a cool design for the show, although the requirements for turning into a Super Saiyan 4 aren't completely clear. As a matter of fact, I felt that the artwork for Dragon Ball GT was modern and cool compared to Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, and I personally liked the change, although others don't. The Black Star Dragon Ball saga was clearly the worst saga of all, as it was immature and illogical with such weak villains. The Baby Saga was the best concept for a villain in the series, since we haven't seen a villain that possessed other characters' bodies before. Now you could say that Majin Buu absorbed other characters, but Majin Buu didn't directly take over their bodies for himself. Super 17 was a great concept of villain too, but I felt that he was just way too strong for the Z fighters who were much stronger at that point in the series, especially considering the fact that Trunks got injured in a car accident, which made absolutely no sense to me. The Shadow Dragon arc was an amazing concept for villains, but it was executed poorly as the Z fighters had virtually no impact even against the weak Shadow Dragons. Now you could say that they did help power up Goku, but he needed to fuse with Vegeta into Gogeta afterwards, and ultimately he needed to use the Universal Spirit Bomb to get the job done, so they were basically useless. Furthermore, the show could have been much better if Goten, Gohan, and even Trunks had a bigger role. Maybe making Pan a Super Saiyan would have been neat as well. Who knows, an adult fusion between Goten and Trunks would have been awesome to see. As far as other characters are concerned, it would have been cool if Oob had more characterization in the series as well. Maybe the show could have shown more of the training sequences between Oob and Goku in Oob's village. Who knows, maybe we can learn more about the culture of Oob's village or some of the villagers themselves. Oob was a character that should have had a lot more exposure, which would have been much better for the series. As far as Gohan is concerned, he should have had more fights in the series, considering the fact that he still retained his Mystic Gohan form, or he should have retained his Mystic Gohan form, as GT showed an inconsistency allowing him to turn into a Super Saiyan. He was one of the biggest characters in Dragon Ball Z, and with his Mystic Gohan powers, he should have had a much bigger impact. But let's not forget the other characters in the series. For example, let's look at characters like Oolong or Yajirobe or Korin. Those characters had absolutely no impact in the series at all, and I think that was the biggest flaw that Dragon Ball GT had. Now, I will admit that the fight sequences in Dragon Ball GT, especially against the Shadow Dragons, were actually fun to watch. My only problem with the fight sequences would be that the fights were too short, but considering the fact that Dragon Ball GT as a whole was only 64 episodes, it kind of makes sense why they were short and all. So to be honest, I honestly think that Dragon Ball GT isn't as bad as others suggest it is. The reason why I believe people hate it so much was because Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball made the show look like complete trash. If certain things were changed, the show could have been even better than Dragon Ball Z, which is not a perfect series even though it's my favorite show of all time, if the writing were much better. Perhaps making the show longer to explain the 100-year gap better would have been a better route to go, instead of explaining it in half of an episode. GT Legacy was a decent movie even though I felt Goku Jr. was way too weak for the villains he fought, especially as a Super Saiyan. So guys, that has been my video for today. I know for sure that many of you will definitely disagree with the fact that I do not think Dragon Ball GT was as bad as other people make it out to be. However, this is my opinion as I've reviewed this series. GT sucked compared to Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, but some of the fight sequences were good and the series had some good ideas that were just poorly executed. It even had several comical moments as well. But I would like to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. Also, please check out both of my video partners, Blackenfist and Thundershot, in the description. But most importantly, over everything else, please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. And remember, as I always say, to have a great day, guys.